I want to just talk a bit about this Globalize the Intifada thing that you mentioned was happening in Brooklyn, because that was really alarming for me to hear about this.
Yeah, it was alarming for me too. I started to see posts of people saying globalize the Intifada, kind of question mark, more in support of Israel, saying, what are you globalizing, right? And I realized that this was starting to pick up traction. So the back end story is that on Saturday, so I think it was August 1st or July 31st, there was a rally in Brooklyn where people were chanting things like, we don't want two states, we want it all. And one of the other things that they were chanting was globalize the Intifada. Now, this is not a word that should be thrown around. It's not a word that should be chanted ever. I don't care what people might say to me that it means to them. Well, Intifada means uprising. Intifada means revolution. Intifada means, civil disobedience. No, it doesn't. Or at least, no, it didn't. And the damage was done. What Intifada meant to me as a 13, 14-year-old kid living through the second Intifada, what it meant was murder. Because that's what it was. It wasn't like, oh, we're targeting soldiers and fighting against Israel's military control of the West Bank, or what people would call the occupation. It's let's get on buses and blow ourselves up and kill innocent women, children, elderly people, and of course, men. Men are also innocent. I don't know why we always not include them in that category. But the Intifada for me was 2 years of living in fear of my life. Every day getting on a bus knowing that it could blow up. Watching buses blow up, watching our marketplaces be targeted, supermarkets, shopping malls, schools. My siblings had a friend who was burned to death in his dorm room when terrorists infiltrated his boarding school and threw a grenade into his dorm room window. This is not legitimate violence of any kind. This isn't legitimate resistance. And people who use that word to try to minimize what this actually meant to us are disgusting. The Intifada was a Palestinian sniper looking through a sniper scope at Shalhevet Pass, an 8-month-old baby, and her father walking around the Jewish neighborhood of Hebron. And now people will say, oh, well, they were settlers. And I want you to keep that in mind when I tell you what happened. When this sniper looks at these two individuals, an 8-month-old baby and a grown man, and decides to point his sniper scope at that 8-month-old's head and proceeded to kill that 8-month-old child, Shalhevet Pass, instead of aiming at the grown man standing right next to her. That's what the Intifada was. The Intifada was a suicide bomber walking up to a group of teenagers, my friends, on a Saturday night out eating pizza, and blowing himself up standing right in the middle of that crowd, packing his bomb with nails and screws to ensure that he would cause as much carnage as possible, and murdering 3 of my friends in the process. That's what the Intifada was. They were 15-year-old kids out eating pizza. I don't know how anyone out there can look at me and try to justify that, or try to say that that is legitimate resistance. That is nothing but murder of innocent people, children, a baby. And so this notion, this call for globalizing the Intifada is disgusting. It is a call for outright murder. And don't let anybody tell you that that word means something else. Because when you say that word to Israelis who lived through the second Intifada, all it brings up in us is the memory of us burying our family members and our friends who were murdered by terrorists. That's what the Intifada is. So for all of you out there, for anyone who starts to say globalize the Intifada, now you know what you're supporting. Live with that.
Absolutely. And what is happening with this movement? I mean, is it mainly an online thing? Is it centered in New York? I mean, do we know the origins of it?
I have no idea. I don't know anything. All we know is that it started to be chanted. Look, it's not new that this word Intifada is thrown around. We have videos of rallies on campus where people chant Intifada, Intifada, long live the Intifada. So this is a word that is used within the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitic spheres. And again, it's usually talked about as resistance. So I think this is just continuing that trend. But what we're seeing is this is picking up on social media as a campaign. Globalize the Intifada. I don't know where it's going to go, but I'll tell you something. I'm doing my damnedest to stop it dead in its tracks because it's unacceptable.
So much of the battle that we're fighting is about people understanding the words that they're saying, isn't it? You know, like,
oh my gosh, I've been teaching so much lately. Just define your terms, right? I've been teaching my students when somebody says to you they're an anti-Zionist, don't just jump on them and attack them. Why do you hate Israel? What? No, take a deep breath and ask them the simplest question. What do you mean by that when you call yourself an anti-Zionist? Help educate people. Don't just attack people. The best thing that we can do is ask somebody, what do you think that means, right? Define that term for me. And we also need to get better about defining our terms, which is why I've said now countless times, what is Zionism? Let's define it, right? Let's understand what it really means. And so it's the same with Intifada, right? We just need to understand what these terms mean. And I should say, not allow people to water them down. What we are seeing and what we saw, for example, with the Human Rights Watch report against Israel, they watered down the term apartheid so much that it almost loses its meaning. Genocide, right? Today, genocide meant something. It's a word that emerged after the Holocaust to really describe what had happened to the Jewish people. And genocide has a very clear definition. It's the intention to wipe out an entire group of people, an ethnic group, a religious group, etc. And today it's being watered down to the point that now it might just mean, people being killed systemically, maybe even not systemically. And I think this is one of the biggest fears to a certain extent that I have as an educator is, if you're going to teach a curriculum, have a glossary of terms, have clear-cut definitions, and don't play around with definitions, because once you do that, these words lose all meaning. If it means everything, then it means nothing.
I think for our next interview, we should just go through like 20 words and define them. I think that'd be really important. Like, people need to know that. What do you mean by the word settler? What do you mean by the word occupy? What do you mean by the word indigenous? Like, all these words that you can't have a conversation. And by the way, the job becomes so much easier once people will accept basic definitions, right? Because then
oh my god, yeah. And you know what, we should you're inspiring me to tell the Stand With Us social media team to go, and we should just do carousels on Instagram, once a week. Let's define a term, and have that be one of our ongoing social media campaigns where we just continuously define language.
I think it could be you could create like a Stand With Us like dictionary or pocketbook, like glossary, because then you tell anyone when you start a conversation, okay, before we start, what are we discussing again? Okay, let's just quickly just get up these words and just say what we mean by them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.